William Thomas Beckford was an English novelist, a profligate and consummately knowledgeable art collector and patron of works of decorative art, a critic, travel writer and sometime politician, reputed at one stage in his life to be the richest commoner in England. His parents were William Beckford and Maria Hamilton, daughter of the Hon.George Hamilton. He was Member of Parliament for Wells from 1784 to 1790, for Hindon from 1790 to 1795 and 1806 to 1820. He is remembered as the author of the Gothic novel VIAF, the builder of the remarkable lost Fonthill Abbey and Lansdowne Tower, and especially for his art collection, Biography. Beckford was born on 1 October 1760 in the family's London home at 22 Soho Square. At the age of 10, he inherited a fortune from his father William Beckford, who had been twice Lord Mayor of London, consisting of £1 million in cash, an estate at Fonthill in Wiltshire, and several sugar plantations in Jamaica, worked by enslaved Africans. This fortune allowed him to indulge his interest in art and architecture, as well as writing. He was briefly trained in music by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, but his drawing master, Alexander Cousins, was a greater influence, and Beckford continued to correspond with him for some years until they fell out. On 5 May 1783, Beckford married Lady Margaret Gordon, a daughter of the 4th Earl of Aberfoyle. However, he was bisexual and after 1784 chose self-exile from British society when his letters to William Courtenay, later 9th Earl of Devon, were intercepted by the boy's uncle, who advertised the affair in the newspapers. Courtenay was just 10 years old on first meeting Beckford, who was 8 years older. For many years Beckford was believed to have conducted a simultaneous affair with his cousin Peter's wife Louisa Pitt. Beckford was discovered to be whipping Courtenay in some posture or another after finding a letter penned by Courtenay to another lover. Although Beckford was never punished for child molestation, fornication, or attempted buggery, he subsequently chose self-exile to the continent in the company of his long-suffering wife. Having studied under Sir William Chambers and Alexander Cousins, Beckford journeyed in Italy in 1782 and promptly wrote a book about his travels, dreams, waking thoughts and incidents. Shortly after this came his best-known work, the Gothic novel VIAF. Written originally in French, he boasted that it took a single sitting of 3 days and 2 nights, though there is reason to believe that this was a flight of his imagination. According to Srinivas Aravamudan, VIAF is an impressive work, full of fantastic and magnificent conceptions, rising occasionally to sublimity. His other principal writings were memoirs of extraordinary painters, satirical work, and letters from Italy with sketches of Spain and Portugal, full of brilliant descriptions of scenes and manners. In 1793, he visited Portugal, where he settled for a while. Beckford's fame, however, rests as much upon his eccentric extravagances as a builder and collector as upon his literary efforts. In undertaking his buildings, he managed to dissipate his fortune, which was estimated by his contemporaries to give him an income of £100,000 a year. The loss of his Jamaican sugar plantation to James Beckford Wildman was particularly costly. Only £80,000 of his capital remained at his death. Art collection. Beckford was a compulsive and restless collector, who also frequently sold works, sometimes later repurchasing them. His collection was notable for its many Italian Quattrocento paintings, then little collected and relatively inexpensive. Despite his interest in romantic medievalism, he owned few medieval works, though many from the Renaissance. He was also interested in showy Asian objets such as Mughal hard stone carvings, but although he avoided the classical marbles typical of the well-educated English collector, much of his collection was of 18th-century French furniture and decorative arts, then enormously highly priced compared to paintings by modern standards. He bought of Single Turner in 1800, when the artist was only 25, and in 1828 William Blake's drawings for Gray's Elegy, as well as several works by Richard Parkes Bonington, but in general he preferred older works. By 1822 he was short of funds, and in debt. He put Fonthill Abbey up for sale, for which 72,000 copies of Christie's illustrated catalogue were sold at a guinea apiece. The pre-sale view filled every farmhouse in the neighbourhood with visitors from London. Fonthill, with part of his collection, was sold before the sale for £330,000 to John Farquhar, who had made a fortune selling gunpowder in India. Farquhar at once auctioned the art and furnishings in the Fonthill sale of 1823, at which Beckford and his son-in-law the Duke of Hamilton were heavy purchasers, often buying items more cheaply than the first price Beckford had paid, as the market was somewhat depressed. What remained of the collection, as it was maintained and added to at Lansdowne Tower, amounting virtually to a second collection, was inherited by the Dukes of Hamilton, and much of that was dispersed in the great Hamilton Palace sale of 1882, one of the major sales of the century. The Fonthill sale was the subject of William Hazlitt's scathing review of Beckford's taste for idle rarities and curiosities, a mechanical skill for fine bindings, bijouterie and highly finished paintings, the quintessence and rectified spirit of still life, republished in Hazlitt's Sketches of the Picture Galleries of England, and richly demonstrating his own prejudices. Beckford pieces are now in museums all over the world. Hazlitt was unaware that the sale had been salted with many lots inserted by Phillips the auctioneer, that he had never passed Beckford's muster. "I would not disgrace my house by Chinese furniture," he remarked later in life. Horace Walpole would not have suffered it in his toy shop at Strawberry Hill. Works owned by Beckford now in the National Gallery, London. St. Catherine of Alexandria. The National Gallery paid £6,000 in 1839 as part of a bulk purchase from Beckford. Agony in the Garden, bought at the Joshua Reynolds sale in 1795 for £5, sold with Fonthill and repurchased by Beckford at the Fonthill sale for £52.10. Portrait of Doge Leonardo Loredan. Giovanni Bellini, bought 1807, 13 guineas, sold to Eng in 1844 for £630. Exhumation of St. Hubert, Roger van der Weyden and workshop, bought by Beckford in 1802 for £96.12, by Eng in 1868 for £1,500. Philip IV in brown and silver by Diego Velázquez, bought by Eng for £6,300 at the 1882 Hamilton Palace sale, a very high price for a Spanish painting at the time. Ticcia and Siphonas by Andrea Mantegna, £1,785 the pair in 1882. Adoration of the Magi, Filippino Lippi, £1,227 in 1882. The Poulterer's Shop, Gerrit-Dow. Circumcision, Luca Signorelli, £3,150, 1882. St. Jerome in a Landscape, Cima da Conegliano. Virgin and Child with St. John, Perugino. Crucifixion Altarpiece Jacopo di Cione or Style of Orcagna, the principal Trecento work in the collection. Now in the Frick collection. Claude Lorraine, The Sermon on the Mount, inherited from his father, c. 1656. Gentile Bellini, Doge Giovanni Mocenigo. Other collections: the Ultieri Claudas, now at Anglesey Abbey, the father of Psyche sacrificing at the Temple of Apollo, 1663, and the Landing of Aeneas painted in 1675. A famous index of taste, as they were auctioned from the estate of H.R.H. the Duke of Kent in 1947 for only £5,300 in 1947 and bought by Lord Fairhaven for Anglesey Abbey, when Beckford had paid £6,825 in 1799, and sold them in £10,500 in 1808, and Philip John Miles paid £12,000 for them in 1813 to hang them at Lecourt, making them among the most expensive paintings of the day. The Fonthill Vars, a 14th-century Chinese porcelain vase which is the earliest known piece of Chinese porcelain to arrive in Europe, where it was given 14th-century metal mounts. Now in the National Museum of Ireland. Other works are in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, the 13th-century Malmesbury Abbey Limoges Champlevé enamel chassis, a matching commode and secretaire made by Jean-Henri Riesner for Marie Antoinette, and two from the 400-piece Meissen porcelain table service for the Prince of Orange, California 1770, the National Gallery of Art, Washington. Wallace Collection, Getty Museum, Walters Art Museum, Huntington Library and Art Gallery. George Romney portrait of Beckford as a young man and his double portrait of Beckford's daughters. The growing database of the National Inventory Research Project involving the National Inventory of Continental European Paintings lists 20 other works from the collection in various other UK public collections. Fonthill Abbey. The opportunity to purchase the complete library of Edward Gibbon gave Beckford the basis for his own library, and James Wyatt built Fonthill Abbey in which to house this and the owner's art collection. Lord Nelson visited Fonthill Abbey with the Hamiltons in 1800. The house was completed in 1807. Beckford entered Parliament as member for Wells and, later for Hindon, quitting by taking the Chiltern Hundreds, but he lived mostly in seclusion, spending much of his father's wealth without adding to it. In 1822 he sold Fonthill, and a large part of his art collection, to John Farquhar for £330,000, and moved to Bath, where he bought No. 20 Lansdowne Crescent and No. 1 Lansdowne Place West, joining them with the one-story arch thrown across a driveway. In 1836 he also bought Nos. 18 and 19 Lansdowne Crescent. Most of Fonthill Abbey collapsed under the weight of its poorly built tower during the night of the 21st of December 1825. The remains of the house were slowly removed, leaving only a fragment which exists today as a private home. This, interestingly, is the first part, which included a shrine to St. Anthony, Beckford's patron when he was living in Lisbon, Lansdowne Crescent and Lansdowne Tower. Beckford spent his later years in his home at Lansdowne Crescent, Bath, during which time he commissioned architect Henry Goodrich to design a spectacular folly at the northern end of his land on Lansdowne Hill. Lansdowne Tower, now known as Beckford's Tower, in which he kept many of his treasures. The tower is now owned by the Bath Preservation Trust and managed by the Beckford Tower Trust as a museum to William Beckford. Part of the property is rented to the Landmark Trust, which makes it available for public hire as a spectacular holiday home. The museum contains numerous engravings and chromolithographs of the tower's original interior, as well as furniture commissioned specifically for The tower by Beckford and gradually reassembled through the efforts of the Bath Preservation Trust and others. There is also a great deal of information at the tower about Beckford, including objects related to his life in Bath, at Fonthill and elsewhere. After his death at Lansdowne, Crescent, on the 2nd of May 1844, aged 84, his body was laid in a sarcophagus and placed on an artificial mound, as was the custom of Saxon kings from whom he claimed to be descended. Beckford had wished to be buried in the grounds of Lansdowne Tower, but his body was instead interred at Bath Abbey Cemetery in Lincoln Vale on the 11th of May 1844. The tower was sold to a local publican who turned it into a beer garden. Eventually it was repurchased by Beckford's younger daughter, the Duchess of Hamilton, who gave the land around it to WorldCat parish for consecration as a cemetery in 1848. This enabled William Beckford's remains to be taken from Bath Abbey Cemetery and reinterred near the tower that he loved. His self-designed tomb, a massive sarcophagus of polished pink granite with bronze armorial plaques, now stands on a hillock in the cemetery, surrounded by an oval ditch. On one side of his tomb is a quotation from VIAF, enjoying humbly the most precious gift of heaven to man, hope, and on another these lines from his poem A Prayer, Eternal Power. Grant me, through obvious clouds, one transient gleam of thy bright essence in my dying hour. Henry Goodrich designed a Byzantine entrance gateway to the cemetery, flanked by the bronze railings which had surrounded Beckford's original tomb in Bath Abbey Cemetery. The WorldCat Cemetery is no longer used for burials, but is open for public access. The tower is open to the public on regular but limited days in the year. Other works. As a writer, Beckford is remembered for VIAF, of which the reception from every quarter may have satisfied his ambitions for a career in belles lettres, and for his travel memoir, Italy, with some sketches of Spain and Portugal. He followed VIAF with two parodies of current cultural fashions, the formulaic sentimental novel in modern novel writing, or The Elegant Enthusiast, and Azimir, a satire on the Minerva Press novels, written as Jack Etragny to Mariana Jenks, of Belgrove Priory in Wales, and also published biographical memoirs of extraordinary painters, a literary prank burlesque wing serious biographical encyclopedias. Towards the end of his life he published collected travel letters, under the title Recollections of an Excursion to the Monasteries of Alcobaça and Batalla, the memoir of a trip made in 1794. Legacy. Beckford left two daughters, the younger of whom was married to Alexander Hamilton, 10th Duke of Hamilton, and inherited the majority of his collection, which was then moved north to Hamilton Palace, now demolished. The elder, Margaret Maria Elizabeth Beckford, married Lt. Gen. James Order. Beckford was portrayed by Daniel Massey in the 1982 Central Television production I Remember Nelson, and has been the subject of several biographies in recent decades. Beckford also wrote a considerable amount of music, much of it was with the assistance of his amanuensis, John Burton, with whom he collaborated on his largest composition, Arcadian Pastoral. The music manuscripts, which had lain among Beckford's effects at Hamilton Palace, were bought and presented to Basil Blackwell as a living present. He, in turn, bequeathed them to the Bodleian Library. In 1998, Michael Maxwell Steer edited and published all Beckford's music, including the collection of Modernas Brasileiras which had been copied for him during his stay at Sintra in 1787. These are particularly interesting as they are the second surviving example of this Portuguese song form. The edition is available in 6 volumes from the Beckford edition. It can be consulted in the Bodleian and elsewhere.